Hi there tonight. We wake up in a world thick with fog where the cold creeps under the door like a nosy cat, and your breath curls in front of your face like smoke from a candle snuffed out too soon. It's Britain sometime in the 7th century. The sun isn't even fully up and already your feet are numb. Your straw bed has poked you in 4 new places, and someone, likely a pig, has stolen the best spot by the fire. You probably won't survive this day without stepping in something unfortunate, burning your tongue on porridge, and developing a profound respect for indoor plumbing. Before you fully sink into your pillow, a quick like and subscribe would mean the world if you're into sleepy stories like this. Got a strange bit of history you want to hear? Before bed, drop it in the comments. Tuck yourself in, slow your breathing, and let the past keep you company tonight. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake inside your wattle and daub hut, which is a fancy way of saying mud walls with decorative drafts. The thatched roof creaks gently above straw and reeds woven together like a hedgehog's hairbrush. It's raining but softly, so the thatch only leaks in the places you haven't noticed yet. Your bed is a low wooden frame if you're lucky, or more likely just a heap of hay and rags covered in a wool blanket that smells like the inside of a slightly anxious sheep. You sit up, brush the straw from your hair, and try not to knock your head on the beam above which you still do every other morning. Around you, the hut stirs, your spouse snoring softly, your child asking questions already, and the family goat chewing something it shouldn't all occupy their corners. Privacy is a luxury, as is silence. You're used to it, mostly. The hearth is the heart of your home, and it's where you slept closest last night trying to keep warm without becoming a cautionary tale. The fire's embers are faint now, so your first task is to coax it back to life with a bit of tinder, a careful breath, and your second favorite prayer. The smoke doesn't leave through a chimney, there isn't one, but curls up and finds its way through the thatch, staining the beams and your lungs with gentle persistence. You cough once. Your goat looks unimpressed. A cold wind sneaks under the door. You consider stuffing the gap with moss again. You step outside to relieve yourself. No chamber pot here, just the edge of the yard where the morning mist swirls among the stinging nettles. Your feet sink slightly into the earth. It smells of damp wood, damp wool, and damp everything. You sigh. So does the goat. Back inside your household begins its routine. Your eldest starts grinding grain on a quernstone with slow circular motions, creating the flour that will become breakfast and maybe lunch. The sound is rhythmic, comforting, a reminder that some things never change, like how long it takes to get even a cupful. Your spouse is feeding the chickens who squabble like villagers at a tavern. Eggs today. Maybe, maybe not. They've been temperamental since the fox incident. You hang your cloak still damp from yesterday near the hearth to dry. You wrap your woolen shawl tighter, and rub your fingers to life. The calluses there are not delicate. You've earned every one. Historians still argue whether Dark Age huts had separate rooms or were just cleverly divided single spaces. In your case, it's all one space: sleep, cook, eat, think, all within spitting distance. Cozy in theory, loud in practice. But there's a kind of comfort here. Everything has its place. The pot for boiling stew, the low bench with the broken leg, the shelf with the family's few precious things. An iron knife, a carved spoon, a cup that doesn't leak unless it's facing east. Your neighbors are beginning to stir too. You hear a rooster crow in defiance of its own cold feet. You smell the faint tang of someone's fire taking hold. You hear a door creak, a dog bark, a child scream laugh as they fall into a puddle for the third time this week. You stretch, you yawn, you press your palm to your lower back and grunt in the universal language of this again. The day has begun. The mist will lift, the hearth will smoke, and the goat will do something suspicious. You are awake. And whether this will be a day of peace, of toil, of surprise visits from overly dramatic monks, or just one more chapter in the long, slow, oddly comforting story of survival in Dark Age Britain, well, that remains to be seen. But for now, you sit by the hearth, cup in hand, shoulders heavy, heart quiet, and the past, like the fire, begins to glow. Your stomach grumbles in a voice louder than you'd prefer at this hour. Breakfast, then, such as it is. Nothing fancy. No cinnamon rolls or cappuccinos here. Just the daily bread of the British Dark Ages, sometimes literally. Your child brings over the flour ground earlier, dusted in a halo of fine powder, that now also coats their tunic eyelashes and most of the floor. You say nothing. You've learned that flour goes where it pleases. The porridge pot is already warming on the hearth. It's a simple affair, water, grain, salt, if you remembered. You stir slowly, coaxing it to thickness. It makes a quiet plop-plop as bubbles break the surface, each one little steamy reminder that your culinary choices are limited. Occasionally, you might throw in some milk if the cow cooperates, or a few dried berries. Today, it's plain, again. Your spouse suggests slicing a turnip into it. You pretend not to hear. You serve it out in wooden bowls, each one a bit chipped, worn smooth by generations of mealtime scrapes. You eat with spoons carved from horn or wood. Yours has a crack near the handle. You suck in porridge, carefully tilting the spoon just so. You've gotten good at this. The flavor is, well, it's mostly texture. Warm, thick, vaguely nutty. It tastes like routine and comfort and your childhood, and also a little like yesterday's dinner. Your goat eyes the porridge longingly. You deny it with a stern glance. It chews something indignant. After breakfast comes bread, flat, dense stone ground. Barley loaves baked in the coals overnight. You break off a piece and try not to think about how gritty it feels. That's not seasoning, that's residual millstone. You chew slowly and consider your dental future. Sometimes, if you're lucky or it's a feast day, there's honey. Not much, just a dab hidden in a ceramic pot that everyone pretends they forgot about. A single drop can turn your porridge from barely edible to mildly celebratory. Other days there's cheese fresh if it's spring, harder than your kneecaps if it's winter. Cheese that squeaks when you chew it. Cheese that may or may not contain memories of the cow's emotional state. Historians still argue whether early medieval Britons had consistent access to butter. You've had it twice this month. Both times it tasted like magic and smoke. There's no sugar, no fruit compote, no brewed coffee to shake off the fog. You might have ale, a light, sour, cloudy drink that barely registers as alcohol, but helps with the fact that your water source is suspect. Your child spills some. The goat licks it up. You let it. You're not proud, but you're not wasting anything either. You eye your dried meat ration still hanging near the hearth. It's more jerky than meat at this point. Brown, tough, seasoned with ash and possibly a hint of thyme. You'll save it for later. It's technically breakfast adjacent, but you're rationing out your week. Breakfast is communal, noisy, and brief. No long table talks, no reading the morning scroll. Just slurping, muttering, scraping, and someone, likely the child, asking if they can feed their porridge to the pig. No, you say. That's tomorrow's lunch. They don't laugh. It wasn't a joke. After the meal, your bowls are rinsed in a bucket of cold water. Maybe with soap root. Maybe just with willpower. You wipe them with a cloth that once had dreams of being a tunic and place them on the shelf to dry. You tie up the flour bag, brush the crumbs from your lap, and stretch your legs, already dreading the labor to come. Food in Dark Age Britain isn't about flavor. It's about function. Energy to dig, to weave, to thatch a roof, to chase after your neighbor's pigs that keep escaping and leaving suspicious gifts in your garden. It's what keeps your hands strong enough to spin wool, your feet sure enough to walk muddy miles, Your back sturdy enough to haul stones for some local chieftain's fence, and it's what binds your day together. You may not remember every word you speak, every step you take, but you'll remember every bite you manage to turn into warmth. You glance at your family cheeks full porridge steaming. The goat sighs heavily. This is breakfast. This is enough. Now that your belly is warm, if unimpressed, it's time to face the next ordeal getting dressed. You look at your clothes the way a knight might eye a dragon, with familiarity, with a little dread, with the knowledge that this will take longer than it should. Your underlayer is linen if you're lucky, or wool if life has been especially cruel lately. You pull it over your head, wincing as the scratchy hem brushes that patch of skin on your ribs that always seems to be sunburned, even when there's been no sun. It's plain, dyed if at all with plant-based colors that fade faster than a bard's promises. Ochre brown if you're daring a muddy green that some call leaf but looks more like pond surprise. Next comes the overtunic thick wool, coarse and stubborn. It smells faintly of lanolin and last week's smoke. You pull it on with a small grunt, twisting to get it to lie right. It never does. You cinch it all with a belt leather if you've got one, or braided cloth if you don't. It holds your knife, your pouch, a few miscellaneous herbs wrapped in waxed cloth, and the sense of dignity you're trying desperately to maintain as your hem catches on your foot. Your shoes, yes, turn shoes they're called. Soft leather stitched with uneven seams, no left or right foot, just hope you remember which one stretched more. The soles are thin enough to feel every pebble, thick enough to pretend they're shoes. You tie them with cords and mutter a small curse when the knot slips for the third time. Over it all, a cloak, if you have one. Rectangular, heavy, draped over your shoulders and pinned with a brooch that might have once belonged to someone important. Now it mostly catches on things. The brooch is shaped like a circle, or a beast, or a spiral. Designs don't always make sense, but they carry stories and you wear them like you understand every swirl. Your hat or hood, depending on the weather, is pulled low. It hides your hair, which is cleanish and full of straw from that incident with the goat's bed last night. You sigh, you'll brush it later. Maybe. Your hands are wrapped if it's cold. Wool mitts with the fingertips exposed so you can still grip tools and rub your eyes when someone mentions re-thatching the roof. A woman in the next hut over wears a similar outfit, layered skirts that swish when she walks, and an apron stiff from honest work. Her head covering keeps her hair from falling into the cheese she's making, and her sleeves are rolled up in the universal language of "I'm doing 10 things right now." Historians still argue whether Dark Age clothing was as drab as the soil, or whether people wove more color into their lives than we give them credit for. The truth likely lies in between. You've seen red dyes faded but vibrant ones, blues from woad that stained everything including the washer's hands, and yellows so bright they made your eyes water. But those are for feast days. Today is a Tuesday or something like it. So it's brown and more brown with accents of shrug. You adjust your belt one more time. The knife is digging into your hip. You shift it. Now it's digging into your ribs. You adjust again. Better. You glance in the polished bronze shard you keep for emergencies. Your reflection is warped but familiar. Weathered a little soot-streaked, definitely still chewing that last bite of porridge. You wipe your chin. Your child pulls on their shoes with a frown of pure betrayal. Why do these always smell like onions, they ask. You say something about fate. They don't buy it. And then finally you're dressed. Layered, braced, swaddled in wool and caution. Ready for the fields. Ready for the market. Ready at least to step outside and face the damp. Your limbs feel heavier now, wrapped and bundled, but also safer. And though your sleeves sag and your shoes squeak, and your tunic insists on rotating slightly left, you stand tall. Because getting dressed isn't just about warmth. It's about armor. Against wind. Against gossip. Against goats. You tie your cloak tighter and open the door, and the day in all its muddy glory awaits. Your first steps outside are met with mist mud and the unmistakable grunt of a pig that is not where it's supposed to be. Again, you eye it. It eyes you. A standoff ensues. You reach for a stick. The pig, perhaps remembering yesterday's scolding, decides to trot back toward the pen on its own. You pretend that was the plan all along. Welcome to your neighborhood. You don't have a front porch or a welcome mat. You've got a muddy path, a few suspiciously leaning fences, and an open layout with excellent goat visibility. But beyond that, a vibrant, if slightly damp community. To your left, your neighbor is already outside beating a rug with more enthusiasm than the situation requires. She's humming a tune older than the hill you live on and occasionally pauses to shout lovingly at a goose with boundary issues. She offers you a nod. You nod back. That's considered a full conversation. Up the hill lives Brother Said, a monk who arrived 5 years ago with nothing but a crumbling book of psalms and a set of sandals made for warmer climates. He wears a robe that's more patch than fabric and spends his days copying manuscripts and asking the sky rhetorical questions about sin and cheese mold. He waves to you now from beneath a dripping hood. You wave back. And just beyond the edge of the village is Oswin, who claims he used to raid with the Saxons before deciding he preferred baking. His bread is excellent. His stories are questionable. Did I ever tell you about the time I stole a sheep from a bishop and named it Gregory? Yes, he did. You live among people who would share their last crust of bread or accuse you of sorcery if your carrot crop looks too healthy. Both are gestures of deep affection. Children dart between huts, arms flailing faces, muddy shouting about a frog with too many legs. No one stops them. They'll learn. Or they'll bring the frog to the elder again, who will solemnly declare it a sign and then discreetly let it go. At the center of the settlement is the moot tree, an ancient, gnarled thing that leans slightly toward the sunrise, and under whose branches disputes are settled. Announcements are made, and occasionally someone gets dared to eat a worm. You gather near it once a week to hear news. Today the talk is about a trader passing through soon. Maybe he'll have salt, or iron, or just new jokes. Your neighbor's cousin swears she saw a Roman coin in the field last week. Everyone leans in. Someone asks what a Roman is. Someone else starts humming again. No one agrees on anything, but the discussion is deeply satisfying. There's gossip, of course, about who's been seen sneaking around the mill at night, probably just a cat. About whether Ildgith's new tunic is dyed or just stained verdict, both. About why the ale tasted slightly better this week, possibly fewer frogs in the barrel. You laugh. Quietly. The kind of laugh you've mastered respectful of other people's reputations, but absolutely keeping score. Historians still argue whether early medieval communities were as close-knit as we imagine, or if everyone just tolerated each other out of necessity. But standing here listening to a sheep bleat in protest as it's repainted with red clay markings for a midsummer ritual, you're fairly sure the answer is both. Your goat has returned. With a shoe. Not yours. You sigh, take it, and vow to return it before anyone notices. Communities like that. A shared mess. A patchwork of favors and borrowed cloaks and unresolved debates about whose turn it is to fix the communal gate that leans more every week. The gate, incidentally, is now being propped up with a bucket. No one discusses this. As the morning fog lifts, you help a neighbor gather kindling. In return, she hands you an apple so shriveled it looks like it's auditioning for sainthood. You thank her. You'll eat it, eventually. You learn things here without realizing. Like how to read the weather from the way the crows fly. How to tell who's sick by the color of their spit. How to identify edible mushrooms by smell squish, and whether the elder twitches after eating one. This isn't just your home. It's your safety net, your social web, your noisy, muddy, suspiciously goose-themed village. You may not always agree with your neighbors. You may occasionally accuse them of theft envy or cabbage-based witchcraft. But when the wind howls at night and the wolves draw close, these are the people who will stand beside you. And hopefully not steal your last onion. You glance around at the lopsided fences and the clattering pots and the children reenacting an epic battle with twigs. You smile, because this tangled, shared, chaotic mess is where you belong. You step into the fields just as the morning mist begins to rise, curling through the barley like lazy smoke. The air is heavy with dew and the kind of chill that makes your nose reconsider its life choices. You clutch your digging stick, a long, slightly curved piece of wood with ambitions of being useful, and make your way to your assigned plot. It's not much. A few ragged rows of earth bordered by stones, weeds, and one defiant molehill that seems to move overnight. But it's yours. Or at least, yours-ish. The local lord technically owns it. You're just borrowing it for, well, the rest of your natural existence. Today you're weeding, again. You crouch low, knees creaking like ancient doors, and begin the slow ritual of tugging up invaders. Nettles, thistles, dandelions with roots deeper than your patience. Each tug comes with a satisfying squelch, a tiny moment of victory, and a fresh coating of mud under your fingernails. Your tunic rides up slightly. You tug it down. It rides up again. The weeds laugh. By midday, the sun peeks through just enough to make you sweat and question your wardrobe decisions. You pause for a sip of water from a clay flask warm slightly gritty and somehow tasting faintly of last season's turnips. You wipe your brow and glance down the field. A neighbor is arguing with a goose again. You look away. Some battles are private. Beyond him, a group is preparing for plowing. They've got oxen slow, deliberate, and always slightly annoyed. The yoke creaks, the plow bites into the soil, and a man curses as he steps directly into what can only be described as yesterday's cow. You nod in sympathy. Your own field needs turning soon. But for now, it's about maintenance. You pause to adjust the small stone charms hanging from your belt. Protection, allegedly. One's a carved face, another a lump of amber that might just be wax. The third is shaped like a bird or a fish, or maybe a particularly nervous pig. You're not sure, but your crops did better after you tied it on. You glance at the sky. If it doesn't rain today, you'll water the plot with your little bucket brigade. If it does rain, you'll thank the gods, the saints, and the sheep just to be safe. This is the rhythm of your days. Dig, weed, water, repeat. Sometimes you plant flax for linen, sometimes beans, sometimes barley. Wheat's rare, it takes better soil than you have. But turnips adore you. You've started naming them, not all flattering names. You once grew one that resembled the local reeve. You didn't eat it, you just stared at it with quiet satisfaction. There's a patch of leeks you're oddly proud of. They're straight, tall, dignified. You point them out to visitors. They nod politely. You know they don't care. But it matters to you. Lunch is in the field, a hunk of barley bread, a sliver of cheese, and if you're lucky, an apple. You eat with one hand, weed with the other. A bee hovers nearby, eyeing your apple. You consider negotiating. The bee declines. Historians still debate how much surplus the average Dark Age peasant could produce. The answer from your kneeling, mud-caked perspective seems to be barely enough. Maybe enough. Hopefully enough. Insects are your constant companions. Gnats, midges, beetles, the occasional worm that appears in your palm like a gift you didn't ask for. You flick it away gently, it'll be back. A rooster from 3 fields over crows like it discovered fire. You mutter a few words you're not supposed to say around the bishop. The bishop isn't here. The rooster is very much here. In the afternoon, you patch a section of fencing using twine willow and good intentions. It holds. For now, you lean on it to test the strength. It does not pass. You decide it's symbolic. Someone's child wanders by and offers you a dandelion. You accept it with ceremony. They nod solemnly and vanish into the barley like a tiny myth. You finish the day with the last check of your rows adjusting stones, scattering crushed eggshells to discourage spirits or slugs depending on which story you believe. You wash your hands in a nearby stream, scrubbing off the layers of soil effort and goat-printed footprints you still can't explain. Your fingernails remain brown. That's just how they live now. Back at the village, your muscles ache, your back stiffens, and your boots have developed a new hole. But your leeks stand proud. Your turnips are plotting something, and your fence, well, it tried. This is field work, not glorious, but grounded. And you sleep tonight with soil in your palms and the quiet sense that the earth still knows your name. The wind picks up just as you're scraping the last bit of mud from your boot, and with it comes the familiar scent of damp thatch, crushed thyme, and something else. Something pungent, herbal, slightly alarming. You turn your head and see your neighbor emerging from her hut, holding what appears to be a leather pouch filled with sticks' feathers and what you hope is a potato. She's muttering, not to herself strictly speaking to the pouch, or possibly to a nearby rock. You give her a nod. She nods back seriously. The potato bobs once in agreement. Welcome to Healthcare Dark Age Britain edition. Your shoulder has been bothering you all morning. Not enough to stop you from weeding, but enough that you're now reevaluating whether naming your turnips after village elders was a karmically smart choice. So you decide to pay a visit to the local healer. She's not a doctor. There's no such thing here, not really, but she is the woman who knows which weeds soothe a fever, which moss draws out a splinter, and which mushrooms make you see the future. Or forget how to sit upright. She's also your cousin's cousin, twice removed and slightly terrifying. Her hut smells of lavender garlic smoke, and something sharp that makes your eyes water before you've even knocked. Come in, she says, even though you haven't announced yourself yet. You do. Inside, bundles of herbs hang from the beams like upside-down forest chandeliers. Dried roots curl on shelves. There's a rabbit skull perched on a spoon. For decoration, presumably, you don't ask. You explain your shoulder. She nods thoughtfully, pokes you, once mutters, then disappears into a corner and returns with a salve made of goose grease, mint, and what she calls sleepy nettles. She applies it with brisk efficiency. It burns slightly. That's how you know it's working, she says. You thank her and hand over a small pouch of barley. Payment, of course, is flexible. She also accepts cloth eggs gossip, and on one memorable occasion, a story about a dream you had where a talking cow insulted your hat. Outside, you spot your neighbor again. She's now waving a sprig of yarrow over her child's head and muttering a rhyme about sneezing goats and midnight fog. You recognize the ritual. It's for warding off stomach aches, or hauntings, or both. Her child sneezes dramatically. She looks pleased. Back at home, you rummage through your own meager medicinal stash. A pot of honey for cuts, a sprig of dried sage just in case. A piece of white quartz that your spouse insists prevents headaches, though mostly it just ends up underfoot. For toothaches, there's clove if you can get it from a trader, or more often simply chewing willow bark and praying. You've done both. Results vary. Someone once claimed bathing in cold water cured everything. You tried it once. It cured your ability to trust cold water. Historians still argue whether Dark Age medicine was more practical or magical. The truth is, yes, it was both. A fever might be met with herbs and hydration, or with charms chants and burying an egg beneath the threshold. If it didn't work well, maybe the egg wasn't fresh enough. There's a monk in the next village who swears by vinegar. Vinegar for wounds. Vinegar for rashes. Vinegar for prayers. You visited him once with a splinter. He doused your hand and started singing. You haven't been back. Your friend Oswin, the ex-raider turned baker, claims he keeps well because he eats raw garlic every morning. You suspect it keeps him healthy mostly by keeping everyone far enough away that no one shares their illness. You once witnessed a leeching. The patient was pale, the leeches were plump, and the healer declared success when the patient stopped fainting. You're not sure the patient agreed. Still, it's not all guesswork. You've seen wounds cleaned properly, bandages boiled before use herbs chosen with care. The old women in your village have memories longer than the written word. They've passed down cures that work. Not always, but often enough to count. There's a plant that calms stomachs, another that helps you sleep, one that numbs a tooth so well it scares people, and one that makes you sneeze until you forget what your problem was to begin with. You use them all now and then. Carefully. Because medicine here is a little like fire useful, dangerous, and not entirely under your control. As the day fades, you rub the salve into your shoulder again. It's cooled now. The mint is soothing. The goose grease has softened. The ache lingers but softer, like it's considering leaving you alone. You settle by the fire, careful not to bump your arm. Your child places a sprig of something behind your ear. For dreams, they say. You leave it there. Because why not? The worst it can do is summon a talking cow. And frankly, after today, you've heard stranger things. You're halfway through collecting firewood when you realize something's not quite right with the roof. Again, it starts with a drop of water landing squarely in your ear, a cold, decisive splash that makes you blink and question your life's path. You look up. The thatch above the sleeping area has shifted, likely from wind, a wayward chicken, or most likely the slow betrayal of gravity over the course of many damp seasons. You sigh the sigh of someone who knows what's coming. Roof maintenance. You lean your bundle of firewood against the door and fetch the ladder. It's not so much a ladder as it is two long sticks and some rungs that have opinions. But it holds. Usually, you hope today is one of those days. You climb slowly each step, accompanied by a creak, a mutter, and one whispered prayer to Saint whatever the roof one is. The wind picks up just as you reach the top, carrying with it the faint scent of damp moss and distant livestock. You nestle yourself into the slope of the roof like a hay-covered limpet, and begin the delicate work of thatch triage. The thatch is made of water, reed straw, or whatever you manage to scrounge. You pull back a section, exposing the layers beneath dark sodden and wriggling slightly with a few resident beetles. You greet them like old friends. They do not return the sentiment. Using a wooden peg and a bundle of fresher reed, you start weaving. It's not complicated, just tedious. Weave, tuck, press, repeat. You imagine the sound of distant music to keep the rhythm. Maybe that bard who passed through last spring and sang about geese with ambition. It helps. Halfway through, a bee investigates your ear. You pause, let it explore, and wait for it to lose interest in your earwax. It buzzes off, disappointed. Your neighbor calls up from below. You fixing or just nesting? You grunt a reply and throw a clump of straw in his direction. It misses, he laughs. As you patch, you recall the last time the roof collapsed during a feast day right on top of a borrowed pig. The pig was fine. The feast relocated. You were gifted a chicken in apology. The chicken never laid an egg and now lives in semi-retirement under your bench. Once the leak is patched, you tighten the ridgeline stones and turf set along the peak of the roof to hold everything in place. You adjust them carefully, avoiding the one that always wobbles like it's trying to escape responsibility. You add a bit of moss between the reeds, a trick you learned from the old woman 3 huts over. It helps with insulation. Also, birds like to nest there, which is endearing until one steals your thread and makes a tiny nest that looks suspiciously like your best winter hat. Historians still argue whether Dark Age roofs were as functional as they look in reconstructions. Some insist they were surprisingly waterproof. Others suggest that people just got very comfortable being slightly damp at all times. Your experience suggests the latter. Back on the ground, you brush the straw from your shoulders and return to your firewood. The bundles are mostly dry. You stack them carefully inside near the hearth, creating a small, flammable sculpture you call hope. Then you set about checking the rest of your home for roof-related consequences. The corner near the sleeping mat is damp. Again, you stuff it with dried bracken and mutter to yourself. A toad watches silently from the shadows. You nod at it. It blinks. You light the fire. The smoke spirals upward, finds the new patch, hesitates, then drifts through it smoothly. You allow yourself a smile. You sit on your stool. It wobbles slightly. Everything wobbles slightly. From the doorway, your spouse peers up at the thatch. It'll hold, they ask. Until the next goat decides it won't, you reply. They nod satisfied. As evening sets in, the fire warms your toes, the damp slowly retreats, and your patched roof hums softly in the breeze. Not literally, but in that deep, quiet way a shelter speaks. A low whisper that says you did it. You held off the weather. You won for today. And if it leaks again tomorrow, well, you've got extra straw stubborn hands and a ladder that only mostly hates you. You've seen worse. Like that time the beehive took over the chimney. Ah, yes, the beehive. That was last spring. A queen bee settled in above the hearth. For weeks your house buzzed with mild menace and an oddly floral scent. You negotiated. You gave them a corner. They gave you honey. It was tense but civil. Eventually the bees moved on. But you still find the occasional straggler clinging to a cup or judging your porridge. Even bees, it seems, need a roof sometimes. You stretch your legs, sip something warm, and glance up at the newly patched thatch. It's uneven. A little wonky. Perfect. You barely have time to sip your warm ale, more froth than fire, before you hear the clatter of hooves and a voice shouting something about a messenger. You sigh, set your cup down, and step outside just in time to see a young man on a chestnut horse riding into the village with the enthusiasm of someone who has absolutely no idea how many chickens he's about to startle. And there they go, feathers squawking and one particularly indignant hen doing cartwheels past your goat. The messenger slides off his saddle with a wobble, eyes darting about like he's looking for someone with a title or perhaps just an intact hat. He's wearing the slightly singed look of someone who's ridden hard and fast through at least 2 thunderstorms and one overly curious hedge. Message from the thing, and he announces, holding out a wax-sealed scroll like it might explode. Everyone stops what they're doing. Your neighbor drops a rake. The baker's apprentice leans halfway out the window dough stuck to her elbow. Even the goose looks interested, which is rarely a good sign. The scroll is taken by the reeve, who squints at it, nods sagely, and then gestures to you. Go fetch the others, he says, as if this were your job now. You go. Within the hour, the village gathers beneath the moot tree, murmuring like bees in a barrel. The reeve reads the message aloud slowly with the theatrical gravitas of a man who once played a tree in a festival play and never recovered. It's an announcement from the local lord, a thing by the name of Wulfgar, who governs this stretch of soggy land from a slightly less soggy hill fort 2 days' ride east. Wulfgar has decided it's time for another census. He wants to know how many pigs, goats, children, carts, and usable spoons the village possesses. He also wants a tally of able-bodied men for levy service. This part causes a ripple in the crowd. Eyes narrow. Spouses elbow each other. Someone coughs ominously. You avoid looking at anyone directly. This is how you ended up volunteering for things last time. The reeve also reads a decree about new tolls on grain brought to market, which prompts loud groans. Someone mutters Wulfgar's wife must have taken up weaving again. No one laughs. Everyone nods. There's talk of tribute grain hides a goose or two if they're in a generous mood. Tribute is due before the next moon. You mentally count your barley sacks and wonder how persuasive your goat's sad eyes can be. You ask quietly who Wulfgar actually answers to. The reeve shrugs. Another lord, probably. or the king, or a bishop, or Wulfgar himself. Hierarchy in Dark Age Britain is a bit like your roof layered leaky and often held together by sheer insistence. Lords sit above you. Thanes Reeve stewards may be a wandering bishop with a fondness for pears. Their power is based on land loyalty and who has the biggest hall with the least smoke damage. You pay them with labor livestock, or promises muttered while swearing over turnips. In exchange, they offer, well, vague protection, occasional justice, and messengers who scatter your poultry. You once visited Wulfgar's Hall, a low, long building, with carved beams, a central hearth, and the world's most intimidating curtain. You were summoned to resolve a land dispute. You didn't win, but they gave you a meat pie and a new nickname you still haven't lived down. Historians still debate how structured this kind of local governance really was. Were Then's mini-kings wealthy farmers with muscle opportunistic administrators with a taste for ale? The answer from your perspective is yes. They rule with a mix of charm threats and hereditary certainty. Sometimes they arrive in person. Wulfgar once rode through your village in full mail, mostly to show off. He patted your goat. The goat bit him. You offered apologies. The goat offered none. As the crowd disperses, you're left with a list of things to count, a handful of questions, and a mild headache forming just behind your eyes. Later, the messenger, now considerably less heroic, sits by your fire sipping broth and explaining how he got lost in a bog for half a day. He shows you the small iron pin he wears, a badge of office, he says proudly. You note that it's bent, possibly bitten, definitely once used to scratch a sheep. Before he departs, he asks if you have any messages for Wulfgar. You think, then you smile and say, tell him the roof still leaks, but the goats are thriving. He nods solemnly as if this is exactly the kind of intelligence his lord requires. You watch him ride off chickens once again, flailing in protest. The day settles. Power, you realize, doesn't always look like gold or crowns. Sometimes it looks like scrolls goats and a man who can't quite ride straight. The market wakes before the sun, shuffling to life with the soft sounds of boots on dirt wooden carts, creaking under the weight of questionable onions, and traders swearing gently at oxen with more attitude than sense. You rub the sleep from your eyes, grab your basket, and prepare to barter like your lunch depends on it, because it absolutely does. Today's journey is short but muddy. The path to the market winds between hedgerows puddles and one goose that has made a career out of blocking traffic. You nod politely. The goose glares. You detour. When you arrive, the village green has transformed. Blankets are spread out with careful chaos. Tents and stalls lean at improbable angles. Baskets overflow with leeks, roots, feathers, and once memorably a single boot with no explanation. Your own basket holds half a dozen eggs, 2 slightly smushed apples, a scrap of wool, and a jar of honey so precious it's wrapped like a newborn. You're hoping for salt, maybe new thread, or dare you dream a smoked fish that doesn't stare at you too judgmentally. You begin with the salt man. He's old, gruff, and smells like dried seaweed. You offer eggs. He inspects them one by one, sniffing as though they might confess secrets. He grunts. You add an apple. He grunts again. A deal is struck. Salt secured. Next, the weaver's daughter. She has thread dyed a rich ochre made from madder root. You admire it too long. She smiles knowingly. You offer wool. She counters with a request for honey. You hesitate. She leans closer. It's for my mother's cough. You hand over the jar. Thread is yours. Then the fishmonger. He has smoked trout lined up like dozing guards. You pick the one with the least accusatory eye. He wants apples and gossip. You have both. You tell him about the messenger who rode through and scared the chickens so badly they nested in the woodpile. He nods solemnly. You receive your fish. You pause for a moment near a tinker's blanket where twisted bits of metal bone combs, broken buckles, and mysterious objects labeled only maybe useful lie in tangled piles. You find a carved pin shaped like a horse. You trade it for a riddle. What is no legs, no eyes, yet always arrives? You think for a while. You guess regret. He shakes his head. Rain. You agree that's a better answer and pin the horse to your cloak. Market day isn't just about trade, it's social glue. You hear about a cow that gave birth to twins, a marriage proposal accepted via turnip, a sheep that can allegedly hum. You nod at the storyteller. You don't ask for a demonstration. Nearby, a bard plays a tune on a reed pipe. Children dance awkwardly, which is to say honestly. A dog howls along off-key but enthusiastic. You tap your foot. A goat escapes. Again, no one seems surprised. Historians still argue how formal Dark Age markets really were structured gatherings under royal charter, or just lively patchworks of need and convenience. In truth, it feels like both. There's order but no map. There's chaos but also comfort. You pass the healer who's collecting herbs and offering dubious advice in exchange for buttons. Rub this on your head, she says, and you'll dream only of apples. You politely decline. You've had enough apples today. You hear someone call your name. It's your cousin holding a small basket and a very fat chicken. He grins. She's brooding again. Thinks she's a cat. You offer your condolences. He offers a boiled turnip. You eat it. It's surprisingly acceptable. As the sun reaches its highest point, people begin to pack up. Coins jingle softly, but most trade happens in goods. Metal is rare. Trust is currency. So is reputation. You head home with your salt, your fish, your thread, and the faint memory of a tune you can't stop humming. The goose is still at the crossroads. It lets you pass this time. You're not sure if that's approval or a tactical retreat. At home, your spouse inspects your haul. Nods. Says nothing. That's high praise. You sit by the fire, unwrap the fish, and admire your new cloak pin. The horse is crudely carved but sturdy. Like everything here, market days are brief glimpses of a wider world. A moment to swap not just goods but stories. To feel that your tiny corner is part of something larger, something humming with barter and song, and perhaps just once a sheep that really can hum. You close your eyes and think maybe you'll return next week, even if you don't need anything, even if it's just to hear the riddle again. The answer is still rain, but regret's not bad either. You wake to the rhythmic sound of someone sharpening a blade with a stone, and the distant echo of a rooster who clearly doesn't understand the concept of personal boundaries. Today is not for digging, mending, or bartering. Today is for learning. Sort of. There's no schoolhouse in your village. No scrolls or wax tablets for you unless you count the one Brother Said carries like it contains the secrets of the moon it doesn't. It mostly lists how many candles he's misplaced this month. But learning still happens. Constantly, quietly, in places no one calls a classroom. You start the day helping your child untangle wool. You show them how to wind it gently around their arm, how to twist without pulling, how to spot the difference between a burr and a beetle. This is education, a very itchy one. Later, you repair a fence post. Your neighbor joins you, handing you a nail as he recounts the time he tried to herd ducks using only poetry and willpower. You laugh. Then you remember exactly how to set a post straight using only a flat rock and mild swearing. Another lesson passed along. In the village square, a small crowd has gathered to listen to the reeve explain the new toll rules. He uses lots of words, gestures wildly, and eventually draws a diagram in the mud with a stick. It resembles a confused badger. But you get the point. Pay the toll, keep your bread. Brother Said holds informal lessons behind the chapel. He teaches runes a little Latin and the importance of not eating moldy barley. His students are a rotating mix of children, bored adults, and livestock who just like the shade. He lets you sit in sometimes. Today's topic, riddles. I'm always hungry. I must always be fed. The finger I touch will soon turn red. You whisper the answer to yourself, fire. His head smiles. You're pleased. Sometimes he reads from the big book, the one with faded letters and a cover that smells like ancient mushrooms. You don't understand all of it, but the rhythm of his voice is soothing like wind through tall grass. You remember more of it than you think. At home, you teach your youngest how to tell the time by the sun. You point to where the shadows fall at midday, how the rooster's coop casts the longest shade just before dinner, how the pigs line up for feeding like tiny grunting hourglasses. It's not perfect, but it works. Your neighbor teaches you a knot you've never seen tight. Easy to undo, good for bundles or unruly children. You thank her. Try it. Fail. Try again. It holds. That night, your cousin stops by with a song. It's an old one. You haven't heard it in years. You hum along. Your children sit wide-eyed. The song speaks of giants of rivers that whisper of a girl who tricked a bear with cheese. It's part lullaby, part lesson, part brag. You forget parts. You make some up. That's the tradition. Historians still argue whether literacy was more widespread than we assume. Some suggest runes were common, even among villagers. Others argue that memory, not writing, was the primary tool of knowledge. You believe both, because here words live in mouths, not paper. Stories are shared like bread, passed from hand to hand, each person adding a spice, a crumb, a verse. You learn from weather, from animals, from mistakes, and from elders whose backs are bent like question marks, but whose minds are sharper than your flint knife. One woman older than trees teaches you the names of clouds. Another shows you how to treat a bee sting with moss and muttered curses. A man with no teeth but a voice like gravel teaches you how to imitate an owl to scare off crows. It works too well. You don't sleep for 2 nights. As you lie down by the fire, the day's lessons echo in your bones. Not as facts, but as feelings, shapes, patterns. You dream of words carved into stones, of riddles sung over stew of hands, showing hands how to hold a needle, a knife, a memory. This is your school. The mud, the moss, the people. And tomorrow, there will be more to learn. Because the only test here is survival. And the only grade is whether your fence still stands and your child knows not to eat the red berries. You drift to sleep with a riddle on your lips and the answer in your pocket. There's a buzz in the air today. Not just bees, though they're doing their usual enthusiastic laps through the herbs, but something rarer. Something exciting. The minstrel has arrived. You hear him before you see him. A pluck of strings. A nasal hum, the slightly too loud voice of someone who very much wants to be noticed. You turn the corner near the moot tree, and there he is leaning dramatically against the cart that brought him loot slung over his back like a medieval fashion statement. His cloak is patched with colors not native to your village. Dusky green, bright saffron, a suspicious pink. His boots are scuffed. His smile is generous, and his stories, well, they're mostly true. Possibly, hopefully, the children swarm him first, of course. He obliges with a jaunty tune about a goose who stole a knight's sword. You already suspect which goose inspired it. You lean against a fence post, chewing a piece of dried apple, and listen as he moves from music to tale. There's a story of a northern king who challenged the sea to a shouting match. One about a woman who brewed ale so potent it turned her husband into a tree briefly, and another about a talking fox who convinced a village to build him a house, then sold it to a squirrel. The crowd is rapt. Even the elder who normally sleeps through everything is blinking with interest. After the stories, the minstrel offers news. That's the real draw. He's come from the coast 3 villages over. There was a shipwreck, he says, and a fortune in salt spilled into the bay. Another town just crowned a king of turnips for reasons he declined to elaborate on. A distant monastery has developed a new cheese so holy it levitates? You suspect exaggeration. Still, the news feels like sunlight after days of rain. He offers songs for coin riddles for bread and personalized ballads in exchange for gossip. Your neighbor pays him with a carrot and a very detailed account of a pig who once outwitted three dogs and a drunken reeve. He nods gravely, tunes his lute, and begins composing immediately. Later, you find yourself talking with him over a cup of thin ale. He asks about your village, your crops, your roof, which still leaks. You ask him where he's been. He rattles off names that sound like sneezes and fairy tales. Do you remember every place you visit, you ask? Only the ones with decent food and better company, he replies. You raise your cup. Fair enough. As night falls, the village gathers around a bonfire. Sparks rise into the dark like glowing seeds. The minstrel stands tall, well taller, and strums a chord that hums in your ribs. He begins another story. This one's about a hero. The usual sort, strong, brave, covered in dirt and destiny. But halfway through, he pauses, grins, and gestures toward you. And then he says the hero met a farmer who knew more about turnips than the gods themselves. The crowd laughs. You groan. You are now immortalized in song as turnip sage of the South Field. You suppose it could be worse. Historians still argue about the role of minstrels and bards. Were they traveling entertainers, historians, spies? Here they're a little of everything. News-bearers, laugh-makers, reminders that the world stretches beyond the horizon and occasionally includes dancing goats. The music goes late. You hear familiar melodies, new verses to old songs, and one improvised ditty about the time the forge caught fire because someone tried to dry socks in it. You strongly suspect it was Oswin. Eventually, the minstrel packs up. He's offered a bed someone's shed someone else's hayloft. A child's insistence he sleep next to the goose. He politely chooses the hay. You return home under stars that feel just a bit brighter tonight. Maybe it's the firelight still clinging to your skin. Maybe it's the stories echoing in your head. You lie down and hum a tune you didn't know you knew. The kind that turns dreams into poetry and leaky roofs into legend. You wake to the scent of smoke, not the alarming kind, but the kind that means someone's roasting something, slightly out of season and absolutely worth investigating. Your stomach grumbles before your eyes are even open. It's feast day. Well, not an official one. There's no royal decree or bishop's blessing. Just the ancient local kind of holiday when the fields have rested, the sky hasn't tried to kill you for at least a week, and someone remembered last year that this was the day the river goat fell in love with the baker's apron. Don't ask, you weren't there. Preparations began yesterday. Root vegetables, scrubbed dried fruit soaked in weak ale, the communal cooking pots unearthed from wherever they were last left, including one that doubled as a seat all winter. You rise, stretch, and immediately stub your toe on the stool that's developed a new wobble. The stool seems smug about it. Outside the village is humming. People bustle between homes carrying bundles of herbs, loaves of barley bread, dried beans that look like they've seen things, and at least one mysterious jar of what someone swears is wild garlic pudding. You bring your contribution, a netted bag of acorns and a basket of foraged greens. Your child adds 3 mushrooms and a pebble just in case. You nod gravely. The pebble stays. The center of the village becomes a temporary kitchen. Fires crackle. Pots bubble. Someone's roasting a fish too large for its spit, and it's turning very slowly like it's unsure whether it's being honored or punished. Today's menu is determined by what's available, what hasn't spoiled, and what someone's grandmother insists is lucky. You spot Oswin making his famous 3-root stew. He claims it can cure fatigue, heartbreak, and mild goat curses. You ask what the 3 roots are this year. He winks. You quietly decide to eat around the orange chunks. There's a rhythm to it all. People weaving between fires, adding pinches of herbs, stirring with sticks, tasting and nodding like they've just invented cuisine. Feasting in Dark Age Britain is never just about food. It's about the story that comes with it. The woman who picked those berries despite the fox. The boy who fell into the nettles while harvesting wild mustard. The man who swears the onions were a gift from a dream he had about his uncle's ghost. You help set the table's planks of wood on stumps baskets turned upside down laps that double as plates. Everything is makeshift. Everything works. The first bites are hot, earthy, and surprisingly good. Someone added actual salt this time. There are roasted roots with crispy edges, a thick grain porridge with dried fruit, a bean mash with suspiciously spicy notes, and bread so dense it might legally count as a weapon. You chew, you smile, you pass it along. Later, after everyone's full enough to lie slightly sideways, the games begin. Races for the children. A wrestling match that ends in mutual wheezing and a shared turnip. A storytelling contest judged by the elder who once mistook a carrot for a duck. He is, of course, the only fair choice. You share your tale how you once chased a runaway pig into a stranger's wedding and ended up invited to the feast. It's mostly true. You win second place. First goes to the child who recited a riddle entirely in belches. As the sun dips low, the pace slows. People stretch on blankets. Someone pulls out a flute and plays a tune soft as ash smoke. A woman sings a lullaby in a language that predates memory. You chew on a last piece of bread. The pebble is placed on the table as a centerpiece. No one questions it. Historians still debate whether these gatherings were frequent, ritualized, or just seasonal opportunities to eat slightly better food while accusing your neighbor of oversalting the peas. What's clear is this: they mattered. In a world where winter could take more than it gave, where harvests failed, and roofs leaked, a feast was more than indulgence. It was survival made joyful. A defiance wrapped in stew and song. You stay until the stars outnumber the lanterns, until the last bowl is scraped clean, and someone begins humming that tune from the minstrel's visit. You carry your child home asleep on your shoulder, still clutching the winning riddle rock. Your spouse smiles as you tuck it into the windowsill for luck. Your house smells of firewood and smoked onion. Your belly is full. Your heart, too. Tomorrow the porridge will return, the chores, the damp socks, but tonight you feasted. And it was enough. The world outside your door is still blanketed in a thick silence that only winter can weave. Your breath curls in front of your face in soft clouds. The ground crunches beneath your boots, the frost clinging to everything twigs. Thatch your goat's ears, which now resemble small frozen pastries. You pull your cloak tighter. Winter has arrived. You knew it was coming. The signs are there, the sudden hush of birdsong, the way the wind started whispering strange advice, the increased stubbornness of every animal in a 5-mile radius. The Dark Age British winter doesn't politely knock. It seeps in. It curls through the wattle under the door down your spine. It settles in your joints and quietly negotiates with your will to get out of bed. There's snow, but only sometimes. More often, it's just dampness masquerading as air. Your socks have given up. Your knees crack like kindling. And your hut smells of smoke wool and vague determination. You keep the fire going as best you can. Wood is precious now. Every log used is one fewer in the pile you swore was large enough back in autumn. You were wrong. Everyone is wrong about firewood. The hearth becomes everything. You cook over it. You dry your socks near it. You warm your hands until they can flex again. You sing to it, whisper at it, glare at it when it pouts and refuses to catch. Outside, the chickens huddle together in one puffed-up blob of defiance. The goat has taken to sleeping inside, which was not agreed upon in writing, but here we are. It shares a corner with the firewood and pretends not to judge you. Meals are simpler now. More porridge. More dried peas. More hopes and prayers baked into flat bread and served with whatever root you didn't mislabel last summer. You soak beans overnight. You soak everything overnight. If it's not soaked, it's cracked a tooth. You learn this once. The roof creaks under the weight of frost. You listen to it groan like an old man remembering something unpleasant. You place a bowl under the leak. Again. You sew, you darn, you patch. Wool is worn in 3 layers, each itchier than the last. You wrap your feet in linen, then in dreams. They still get cold. And yet there's a kind of beauty to it. The way smoke snakes into the sky pale against the winter clouds. The way the fields go still resting under frost like sleeping beasts. The way your neighbor brings over a hunk of cheese just because and leaves with half your firewood and a recipe for spiced pea mash. The long nights invite stories. You gather around the fire and tell tales of summer, that one where someone accidentally dyed the stream pink. The year the turnips rebelled. The time your cousin mistook a bishop for a bear. You craft riddles, whittle spoons, argue gently over who snores the loudest. It's the goat, everyone agrees. Historians still argue how people survived winters like this. Did they hibernate indoors, emerging only to gather kindling? Did they rely on tight-knit communities, shared meals, and deep reserves of patience? The answer clearly is yes. You lean heavily on routine, on ritual, on the knowledge that spring will come again, eventually. In the meantime, you mend your gloves, your roof, your sense of humor. You repair the stool for the 3rd time, muttering that this is definitely the last. You know it's not. The stool knows too. Evening comes early. The light fades. The wind whistles through the shutter like it's lost and looking for someone named Gregor. You wrap your cloak tighter. You stir the pot. Add a pinch of salt. Whisper a wish into the steam. You hear the village settling. A cough in the distance. A clatter of pots. A lullaby sung off-key but full-hearted. You tuck your child in beside the hearth, layered in so many blankets they resemble a cocoon with opinions. The goat sighs. You sip something warm ale broth, a mystery blend of herbs you're fairly sure were intended for tea and not socks. It helps, or at least distracts. You stare into the fire and feel its warmth seep into your bones, reminding you that survival is a quiet kind of triumph. That you made it another day. That the snow may fall, the wind may moan, the goat may take your seat. But you're still here, still breathing, still burning. And the winter, for all its grumbles and cold fingers, hasn't won yet. You wake before the sun, not because you want to, never because you want to, but because of the bells. They ring softly through the fog carried from the small wooden chapel just beyond the village path. It's a gentle sound meant to call rather than command. And despite your aching back, your stubborn knees, and the fact that your socks have once again migrated in the night, you sit up and listen. It's Sunday, or at least the day that passes for one. And the chapel bell says it's time to consider your soul. You pull on your tunic, your cloak, your boots. You brush the hay from your hair and tug your child's tunic straight. You glance outside. The path is slick, the sky sullen, and a chicken is sitting where your walking stick used to be. You gently relocate it. It glares at you. The chapel is a simple thing. Wooden, small, with walls that lean like they've heard something scandalous and can't quite recover. Brother Sed is already there, his hands folded, his sandals soggy. He smiles as you arrive, nodding, with eyes that say thank you for coming and please don't track mud on the altar again. The service is quiet, in Latin mostly. You understand a few words: peace, mercy, fish. Sometimes fish just sneaks in. The villagers sit on rough benches. The air smells of wax and wet wool. You listen. You think. You drift. Somewhere in the sermon, Sed mentions a feast day approaching. Saints, martyrs, probably more fasting. You sigh. Fasting means less porridge. After the service, people linger. You chat in hushed tones. Someone asks if you've seen any omens lately. You mention the turnip shaped like a bishop. They nod solemnly, deep meaning clearly. But outside the chapel, the old ways still linger. Just yesterday, your neighbor left a bundle of herbs on the doorstep. For luck, she said, though she wouldn't say which kind. Another neighbor swears by a charm carved from rowan wood to keep spirits from the fields. It dangles from his gate, swaying in the wind like it knows something you don't. Your child picked up a stone shaped like a moon and refused to put it down for 3 days. It hums, they said. You didn't hear anything, but the goat hasn't tried to eat it, so perhaps there's something to it. This is the strange balance of your world. The new faith with its bells and candles and orderly saints, and the old one with its whispering trees, its carved charms, and its quietly suspicious chickens. You carry both. You say your prayers. You leave offerings at the boundary stone. Just in case. Historians still argue whether Christian conversion in Britain was swift or slow, full or partial. The answer, like most things, is layered. The priest blesses your child. Your spouse nods to the sun just peeking over the frost. And you walk the line in between, humming a hymn under your breath, while clutching the charm your grandmother made from twine and wishful thinking. At home, you light a candle. You also scatter salt near the door. Because why tempt fate? The rest of the day is quiet. You mend, you hum. You tell your child the story of Saint Cuthbert who befriended otters. Then you tell the story of Bornwyn the hedge witch who tricked a plague into hiding in a hollow gourd. Both are believed. Both are treasured. You hang the herbs your neighbor gave you above the hearth. They smell of sage and stories. You stir the pot. You cross yourself. You touch the rowan charm you tied beside the door. Your life is not about choosing one belief over another. It's about weaving them together like a thatch roof, tightly, carefully, with space for rain to pass but not settle. As night falls, you whisper a blessing over the fire. You do not name the god. You do not need to. They've all been listening, and tonight they seem content. The pig is in your garden again. You spot it just after sunrise, rooting cheerfully among your frost-bitten leeks, as if it owns the place. You step outside wielding your walking stick like a weary knight, and the pig looks at you with a level of defiance usually reserved for tax collectors. Out, you say. It snorts. You repeat yourself, waving the stick. It moves slowly, grudgingly, like a disgruntled guest at the world's worst inn. You guide it back through the crooked gate and latch it this time with a rope and what might once have been part of a belt. Ownership of the pig is complicated. Technically, it belongs to your neighbor. But your neighbor says the pig chooses her own destiny, which is their way of saying she breaks out twice a week and eats your vegetables. You've considered demanding compensation. You've also considered pork, which leads you to the murky subject of property. Because here in Dark Age Britain, you don't exactly own your land, not in the way kings own crowns or goats own your bed. Your patch of field is yours only in the sense that no one else is fighting you for it right now. Your tools, your home, your livestock, all fall into a tangle of rights, customs, and seasonal borrowing that makes everything simultaneously everyone's and no one's. You recall last spring when a cousin borrowed your axe and returned it 3 months later, having renamed it and carved a saint into the handle. You said thank you. You still haven't figured out which saint it's meant to be. The Lord Yurthen Wulfgar of the slightly smudged scrolls owns everything technically. But he also doesn't come around often. You pay him in grain hides and promises you hope he forgets. He protects you, mostly from other lords. The reeve collects the dues. He carries a staff and an air of authority, though he also once tripped into a pond chasing a chicken, and no one's let him forget it. Today he stops by to count things. Your chickens, your sacks of grain, your child briefly until you glare. He nods, makes a mark on his tablet, and reminds you that tribute is due next moon. You nod back. Neither of you brings up the time he borrowed your cart and returned it without a wheel. That's just how things are. You remember the tale of a man who tried to claim full ownership of his field. Built a fence, carved his name, and a stone declared sovereignty. 2 weeks later, the local pigs tore the fence down and slept on the stone. No one speaks of him now. Ownership here is about memory, about who used the land last year, who buried their mother beside that tree, who repaired the ditch that one time, and earned the right to gather nettles near it. It's enforced by consensus tradition and occasionally the threat of mild violence. Historians still argue whether freemen in this period had meaningful legal rights or were just tenants with extra steps. You figure it depends on how loudly they spoke and how often they shared their ale. You officially are a free person. You can marry whom you like, trade at market, and leave if you wish, though with winter roads like this, where would you go? You can be summoned for service. You can be fined. You can sue someone for stealing your duck. You once watched a legal dispute over a missing sheep play out over 3 days, two witnesses, and one dramatic reenactment involving turnips. Justice was eventually served in the form of a shared stew. Your land might be reassigned if you fall out of favor. Your tools might be borrowed indefinitely. Your reputation is worth more than any document because parchment is rare and memory lasts longer than ink. So you tend your garden with care even knowing the pig may return. You tie charms to your gate not to keep others out but to remind them that you're watching. You share your tools but mark them with carved lines only you understand. And at night you trace those same lines in your hearthstones, not because they guarantee ownership, but because they tell your story. Who you are, what you've built, what you'd fight to keep. The pig, of course, returns by sunset. You let it finish the leeks this time. You'll bring it to market next week and accidentally tie it to someone else's cart. After all, justice is flexible, and so is property. The first thing you notice is the quiet. Not the usual kind, the early morning hush before the roosters remember their purpose, or the gentle stillness after the children collapse into slumber, but a different sort of quiet. Focused, buzzing with activity just beneath its surface. You're in the weaving hut, or rather the corner of your home that's been claimed slowly but absolutely by looms, spindles, baskets of carded wool, and a woman with the posture of someone who's solved more problems before breakfast than most lords manage in a lifetime. She is your spouse, or your sister, or your neighbor. Maybe she's all three in one of those delightfully tangled family webs no one dares diagram. She is spinning, and she is without question in charge. Dark Age Britain doesn't write much about its women. Not officially. Scrolls and stones record the battles, the kings, the saints with questionable dietary habits. But here in the villages, in the huts and homes and halls, women run everything. She starts the fire, she stokes it. She grinds the grain and knows when the batch is wrong by the sound alone. She weaves the cloth tight and even sometimes with patterns that echo the land or the stars or a joke only she remembers. You hand her a basket of fresh dyed wool and she inspects it like a chief would an army. One nod. You're dismissed. She tells your child a story while mending a tunic. The tale is about a selkie who married a fisherman but kept her sealskin hidden in the chimney. It's a love story, or a cautionary tale, or both. And all the while she counts stitches, hums a tune, and stops a goat from stealing the kindling, all without standing up. Later, you pass another woman in the village square, elderly, bent, and wielding a spoon like a badge of office. She was a midwife once. Still is, technically. Babies tend to arrive whether they're scheduled or not. She speaks of the body like a map and gives advice that sounds like riddles but always proves true. You remember how she helped your neighbor's wife when the birth took too long. How she sent everyone outside, lit a candle, and muttered to the ceiling. The baby was born before the candle burned halfway. You see her again at the well arguing with the reeve about grain measurements. She wins, obviously. Women carry keys here, literal and metaphorical. They control the food stores, the household goods, the hidden knowledge of plants and prayers. They know how to dye cloth blue without staining the house. They know who's been sneaking out at night and who's just sleepwalking with a piglet. And when a visitor comes, be it merchant, messenger, or monk, it's the women who notice what he's really here for. Historians still argue about the role of women in early medieval society. The legal codes give them names, rights, fines. But the reality is richer than law. You've seen a woman bargain down a trader using only silence. You've seen one tell a lord exactly where to step when he visited during a thaw and he listened. You've watched your own daughter wrestle a goose back into its coop with more bravery than most soldiers. Today, your household runs on female strength. The youngest threads a needle like a challenge. The eldest mends a cloak you thought unsalvageable. Your spouse, still spinning now, sings a low, rolling song. Something about a river, a hill, and a fool who tried to bake bread on a sword. You watch the spindle dance between her fingers. The wool tightens into thread long and strong and sure. You once asked how she learned all this. She said from watching. Then she looked at you and said, "So watch?" "So you do." You notice how she checks the bread dough with her thumb, not her eyes. How she tests the weave by ear. How she tucks lavender in your boots when you're worried and pretends not to know why they smell nicer after. This is not just labor. This is legacy. This is lore passed through gesture and glance, through stitches and soup, through lullabies, hummed while washing ash from wool. When the day ends, she wraps her loom with cloth brushes, her hands on her apron, and tells you it's your turn to stir the stew. You do so with the reverence of someone who knows they are out of their depth. She watches. She nods. It's edible. You eat grateful. Because while you're proud of your turnips and your roof patches and your halfway decent spoon carving, you know the truth. This household works because she does. And that's a kind of power no scroll will ever fully understand. The sun dips lower than usual today, casting long shadows across the thatched roofs and turning puddles into tiny bronze mirrors. You hear a reed pipe before you see the player, its notes drifting lazily on the breeze, curling around chimneys and clinging to door frames. Tonight there will be music. Not a festival exactly, and certainly not a formal gathering. Just a shared agreement, unspoken but somehow known by all, that the air feels right for stories and song. You gather in the common space near the moot tree, along with half the village, a cartwheel, repurposed as a stool, and at least one chicken who refuses to be left out of anything involving attention. Someone brings mead. Not the good mead that's saved for weddings and funerals, but the second best kind brewed last autumn, and mellowed just enough to drink without blinking. It tastes of honey herbs and the faintest whisper of sock. You sip it slowly. The music begins with a pipe low and fluttering like wind through grass. Then someone joins in with a drum, a stretched skin pulled tight over a clay pot, and the rhythm finds your ribs before your feet. You tap along lightly like your fingers have secrets. A woman stands to sing. Her voice isn't polished, but it doesn't need to be. It's lived in, worn soft by use. She sings of a girl who followed a fox into the woods and returned with a crown of moss and the ability to speak to bees. Everyone nods, like this makes perfect sense. Then come the riddles. The rules are simple. The speaker recites the listener's guess, and the goat who always attends eats the prize if no one wins quickly enough. You hear an old favorite. "I have no voice yet," I reply. "I can't escape though I try." "What am I?" "An echo," says your child instantly. You ruffle their hair. It's good to be reminded that some things do stick. The jokes begin next. Some are clever. Some are grown worthy. Some involve farmers' monks and the questionable anatomy of turnips. You laugh harder than you should. Someone starts a clapping rhythm. Someone else adds stomping. Before you know it, there's a dance forming a wobbly, enthusiastic, gloriously uncoordinated loop of humans, shuffling around the fire in patterns inherited from generations, who also didn't know which foot came first. You join. You have to. Not because you're good at it, but because this is what keeps winter from sinking teeth too deep. A moment later, Oswin stands mug in one-hand expression just shy of sober. "I will now recite my epic," he declares, entitled "The Lament of the Thrice-Borrowed Cart." Everyone cheers. He bows. The story is long, mostly rhyming, and only occasionally accurate. It involves a broken axle, 3 confused donkeys, and a curse that may or may not have been real. It ends with him sleeping in the cart and declaring it his true home. The crowd applauds. Someone throws a turnip in appreciation. He catches it. Historians still argue whether these kinds of informal gatherings were common in Dark Age Britain. But standing here with your fingers sticky from mead, your cheeks warm from laughter, and your neighbor snoring gently on your shoulder, it feels obvious. This is necessary. This is balm. This is the village holding itself together with rhythm and rhyme. As the fire dies down, people trickle off to bed. Children are carried home like sacks of flour. The goat is coaxed back into a pen with promises and threats. You stay a moment longer staring into the embers. Someone hums one last tune. You join in just under your breath, words barely formed but full of memory. Because this is how stories live. Not in books, but in breath, in repetition, in the gentle pressure of a shared laugh, passed like bread around a circle. You return home with a light heart and a slightly heavy head. And even as your eyes close, you're still tapping your fingers. Still hearing that reed pipe. Still humming that fox song. You wake scratching. Nothing dramatic, just a slow, resigned sort of itch that begins at the base of your neck and politely continues its campaign down your spine. You mutter a familiar curse, one passed down through generations of people who've had to live with the uncomfortable reality of shared bedding and medieval hygiene. It's bath day. Or rather, it might be bath day. You weigh the risks. The air is cold, the tub is leaky, and the last time you bathed your neighbor commented loudly on your surprisingly freckled knees. Still, the itch wins. You haul out the tub. It's wooden, roughly barrel-shaped and vaguely insulting. It leaks if leaned on too hard and makes ominous creaks when filled. You pour water bucket by bucket from the stream. Each splash echoes your regrets. Then you heat it slowly, cautiously, with the kind of reverence one normally reserves for delicate rituals or poorly trained horses. Eventually, the steam begins to rise, curling into the rafters like it's trying to escape the idea of bath day altogether. You disrobe. Slowly, the goat averts its eyes. The water is warm for one glorious moment, and you step in with the sigh of someone who's just remembered they have joints. You sit, you soak, you contemplate your life. The soap is a hard grayish lump made from lye fat and something your cousin called a cleansing herb, but which smells like angry moss. It works, sort of. You scrub. The water darkens. Later, you rinse with cold water and stand there dripping, steaming slightly like a contemplative vegetable. You dry off with a rough cloth. It's more drying by friction than absorption. Then there's your hair. Comb, yes. Comb made from bone. Also, yes. Comb that's communal because combs are rare and expensive, and treated like minor religious relics, regrettably, yes. You do your best. Then comes the oil. If you're lucky, there's a dab of something pressed from seeds or nuts or even animal fat rubbed into dry skin to stop it cracking. You smell faintly of herbs and ambition. You feel cleaner. Mostly. Clothes go back on slightly stiff from yesterday's damp. You feel the chill of the water settle into your bones, but the itch is gone. For now. Later in the day, you visit the well. The air smells of damp wool and mild regret. Your neighbor asks if it was bath day. You say nothing. She smirks. Her son once ran screaming from a washtub after finding a beetle in it. You bring that up. She drops it. You glance toward Brother Said. He's scrubbing the chapel floor and muttering something about sin, soap, and sanctification. He hasn't bathed in a fortnight, but he has invented a prayer to Saint Lavender. Your child asks when it's their bath day. You say when the wind turns. They nod solemnly, which is child code for never if I can help it. Historians still argue how often medieval people bathed. The reality is that it varied seasonally, socially, and depending on your tolerance for judgmental ducks. You do what you can. Sometimes that means a full bath. Sometimes it means wiping down with a wet cloth and pretending you've achieved enlightenment. Your teeth, incidentally, are scrubbed with the twig chewed until fibrous, dipped in salt or ash, and rubbed across enamel with the intensity of someone trying to erase sin. You spit discreetly. The goat looks away. There's no toothpaste, no floss, no minty rinse. But you have chewed sweet flag root, which numbs the tongue and makes everything taste like licorice and danger. Your nails are scrubbed with sand. Your feet with a bristle brush that might once have been used on a mule. You tie your hair back, rewrap your shawl, and step out into the cold with a faint but satisfying glow. You are clean. Briefly, you bask in it until your child wipes jam on your sleeve, until the pig finds the puddle beneath the tub and rolls in it, until you slip slightly in the yard and land in something that was, until recently, a goose nest. You sigh, but you also smile, because for one fleeting hour you were polished, unitchy, respectably fragrant. You plan your next bath for maybe spring, depending on the wind. The goose honks 3 times low mournful and entirely too dramatic for this hour. You pause at the doorway half-dressed and clutching your breakfast and glance skyward. Gray clouds, no wind. The trees look perfectly reasonable. The goose honks again. You turn to your neighbor. Weather's changing, she says, as if that explains everything. And in a way it does. Because in Dark Age Britain, people don't check the weather by measuring barometric pressure or consulting a chart. They read signs, portents, goose behavior. The way smoke leans when it leaves a chimney. The tilt of a cat's ears. Your great-uncle used to swear that if the chicken stopped scratching the same spot for 3 days, a frost would arrive. He was only wrong once, though. He never explained why he'd been watching that closely in the first place. This morning feels strange. Quiet, but not the peaceful kind. The air is thick. You feel it behind your eyes, under your fingernails, and the way the sheep keep glancing west. You pour a bit of mead into the ground near your threshold. Just a few drops. A thank you or a warning, depending on who you ask. Today is a day for omens, and they are everywhere. The sky opens briefly, and a raven flies overhead, calling out with a sound that makes the elder mutter a prayer and spit into her apron. Twice. Your child finds a pebble shaped like an egg, insists it hums when held against their ear. You listen, it doesn't, but you nod anyway. Someone's dog howls at nothing. The cat follows it, which is the most suspicious part. You find a toad sitting directly in your boot. You choose a different boot. Later at the well, you overhear 3 different theories on what's coming. A storm, says one, from the north, with hail the size of peas. No, says another. A visit from someone important. When the bees act up, that's what it means. A third simply points to the horizon and says, ghosts. You fill your bucket and avoid that one. Back at home, your spouse has hung rowan branches above the door. Not because of ghosts, at least not the loud ones, but because their grandmother always did. You light a small candle just to be safe. The day passes uneasily. The wind shifts. The fire sputters. You forget what you were doing 3 separate times and once find yourself standing in the middle of the yard holding a spoon and a turnip with no memory of how they got there. That evening, Brother Said gives a sermon about vigilance. Signs abound, he intones. The Lord speaks through earth and sky. You wonder if he's also using the goose. The bird honks again, louder this time. You ask it what's wrong. It blinks. Some villagers interpret dreams. Yours last night featured a cart with no wheels, a cow wearing a crown, and the unmistakable sound of laughter. Possibly your own. You mention this to your neighbor. She tells you it means change is coming. You ask what kind. She says the sort that arrives muddy. You nod. Historians still argue whether people in the early medieval period genuinely believed in omens or simply used them as language ways to express doubt, hope, fear without needing evidence. You know how deeply such signs run. The breeze that smells like iron, the fire that refuses to catch, the bread that splits just so in the oven. Each one a whisper, a warning, a welcome. After supper, you sit by the hearth and list the day's events. The strange colored mushroom, the woodpile that collapsed on its own, the bird that flew in, pooped on the mat, then left without a word. You don't know what it means, but you sleep with your shoes beside the bed, your knife close, and your dreams as open as the door. Because maybe the goose knows something you don't. Maybe the signs are pointing to nothing, or maybe they point to everything. The spear is heavier than you expected. It's not yours, not really. It belongs to the village, passed from one reluctant hand to the next when it's time for drills. It smells of old sweat and damp leather, and the tip is slightly bent from that incident with the cartwheel. Still, you hold it, because it's your turn. Once or twice a year, the reeve rounds up the freemen for what's generously called training. What it actually means is standing in a cold field while someone who's never seen a real battle teaches you how to wave sticks in formation. Today is one of those days. The field is muddy. The wind is enthusiastic. Half the men present are either too old or too bored to care, and the other half are desperately pretending to be busy tying their shoes when it's time to demonstrate a proper thrust. You do your best. You line up shoulder to shoulder with your neighbors. Someone sneezes. Someone else drops their spear and pretends it was a test. The drill master arrives late, wrapped in fur and chewing something unidentifiable. He carries a sword longer than your goat, and a voice that sounds like gravel learning to sing. "Ready, ranks," he shouts. You arrange yourself into something loosely resembling a line. The wind rearranges you again. Form the wall. Spears forward, knees bent, back stiff. You feel your shoulder pop. The drill master walks down the line nodding, grunting occasionally, smacking someone with the flat of his blade. He reaches you, squints, and says, "You're holding it like it's soup." You adjust your grip. "Better." He walks on. You hold your stance for what feels like days. Your arms ache, your legs wobble. The man next to you is humming. Then charge. You move forward in a staggered sprint, shouting something that's meant to intimidate but comes out more like an apologetic sneeze. You jab the spear into a bale of hay. The hay is unimpressed. After several repetitions, the drill ends. The reeve declares it sufficient. Everyone exhales. You gather your things and make your way home. On the path you pass Oswin, who's strapping on a helmet made from a cooking pot. Just in case, he says. You nod. Dark Age Britain was not always at war, but it was never entirely at peace either. Raiders, rival lords, border skirmishes, trouble came often enough to keep the spears sharp and the drills frequent, if not effective. Your role should something real happen is clear: stand in the line. Hold your ground. Don't drop the spear. You've heard stories of battles, the sounds, the smoke, the confusion. You'd prefer not to find out for yourself. Still, you practice. You train. Because if the call comes, it won't care if your knees are sore or your child had a fever or your boots are patched for the third time. You sharpen your knife that night. Not because it's needed, but because it makes your hands steady. Your child asks if you're going to war. You say no. You mean it. Mostly. They nod, then ask if they can keep the spoon you carved last winter. You hand it to them. They brandish it like a sword. You smile. Later you sit by the hearth, sore from drills, but oddly centered. You think of the wall of shoulders pressed together of spears aligned like teeth of voices shouting as one. It's ridiculous. It's necessary. It's what you have. Historians still debate how well-trained these local militias were, whether they could hold their own in battle or just slow the enemy down. You suspect the answer is both, because sometimes holding the line isn't about skill. It's about stubbornness, about showing up even when the mud is cold and the hay doesn't fight back. You lie down that night with the spear tucked near the door, just in case. Not because you expect danger, but because being ready is a kind of peace. And because Bent Tip and all that spear has seen things, like you, still standing, still here. The wind has died down, and in its place is a hush so complete you can hear the creak of your roof settling, the gentle flicker of firelight, and your own breath easing in and out. The day is done. The tools are set aside. The animals have been tucked into their corners, some more willingly than others, and the only light comes from the hearth, glowing low and red like the heart of the house itself. You sit beside it wrapped in your cloak, your back curved to fit the bench you've sat on 1,000 times before. A cup of warm ale thinned with water, and steeped with herbs rests in your hands. Your child sleeps nearby, curled like a cat in a nest of wool and straw, clutching the wooden spoon you carved, and a pebble they still insist is magic. You stare into the flames and begin to tell the story. Not loudly, not for the crowd, just for the room for the fire, for whoever might be listening in the quiet. Ancestors' dreams are simply the air. You speak of a fisherman who turned into a tree because he loved the river too much to leave it. You speak of a woman who tricked winter into sleeping so she could bake without interruption. You speak of the stars, how they're really holes poked into the sky by an ancient god looking for his lost sheep. No one interrupts. Even the fire crackles softly as though listening. Outside, the world is damp still and humming with its own stories. The owl hoots once. A fox barks in the distance. You think of the sea far off but always waiting. You think of the land of the fields resting under frost of seeds sleeping in the dark soil. Tomorrow they'll stir again, and so will you. You think back over the day of the spear practice, the markets muddle the soap-scented bath that almost warmed you through. You think of the old songs and the way the village danced, not because it was graceful, but because it felt good to move. You think of the roof patched with straw and hope, of the charm hanging on your door that might keep away spirits or at least give them something to read. And above all, you think of the people, the ones who share your bread, your mud, your gossip, the ones who will help you rebuild when the goat breaks the gate again, the ones who will stand beside you, shoulders square, spears crooked, hearts still willing. Historians will write of kings, of battles, of laws etched into stones and names chiseled into tombs. But here in the flicker of firelight, it is the quiet lives, the steady ones, the soft ones, the slightly itchy ones that make up the real story. And yours is one of them. You place another log on the fire gently, carefully, so it doesn't crack too loudly and wake the child or the goat. You hum a lullaby without meaning to. Your eyes grow heavy. The cloak slips from your shoulders, warm and familiar. And the last thing you remember before sleep claims you is the sound of the wind returning gentle, thoughtful, like a guest who knows not to knock too loud. Let the warmth of the fire settle over you now. Let your shoulders fall, your fingers loosen your breath. Slow to the gentle rhythm of the sleeping hearth. Outside, the frost spreads softly across the fields. Trees hold their breath. The stars blink low and steady above the sleeping roofs. Everything is quiet and everything waits. You've walked far today across muddy paths and stony fields, through markets and meadows, stories and songs. You've stirred pots and mended hems, dodged pigs, and stood steady under the weight of a spear. But now all of that can rest. The roof holds. The fire burns low. The spoon rests in its place, and the stone sleeps beneath your bed. There will be time tomorrow for new tasks, new stories, new reasons to laugh at the goose who surely knows more than she lets on. But for now, just breathe. Let your eyes grow heavy with the weight of soft darkness. Let the echoes of riddles and lullabies drift like smoke across your mind. You are safe. You are home. And this world, for all its mud and mystery, holds you in its quiet hands. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.